Hi, welcome to Hope at Home, bringing Hearts of Hope Family Grief Camp to where you are. Today we're talking with Brian. Brian, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Brian Dingmann. Uh, I live in Annandale, Minnesota, along with my wife Dana, my three kids, Isabel, Elias, and Annalise.
And what do you do for a living, Brian?
I'm a funeral director in Annandale. We bought the funeral home here in town in 2014
Who did you buy the funeral home from?
from my parents.
So
Yeah.
you are a legacy.
My grandfather was a funeral director, yes. Yep, yep,
Fantastic. So you're third generation then.
yes, yep.
Nice. Well, let's get started with the questions. So we've asked a bunch of our funeral director friends these same questions that we're going to ask you because we know all the funeral homes are doing things differently, especially a little bit differently now that we're in quarantine. So what are you doing differently at the funeral home now that we're in quarantine?
What are we doing differently? So at our firm, we're able to be flexible and quick to respond. Part of that is because we're a rather small firm. Our only two full-time employees are my wife Dana and myself. And we have two other funeral directors that are able to help out. So we have four people in a spot that we have the staff to be able to do that. What we're doing differently. Some of the things are simple things. Like today, I have been working all morning, but I'm still at home. Haven't been into the office yet, which I think is universal across a lot of industries. We're trying to have as few people in the building at a time. So we have somebody in the office right now. Our office manager is there. So that's probably the biggest change, but actually it's the most welcome change. That's okay. That's something that I can see us continuing on with. It's nice to be able to work from home a little bit with the kids. Other things we're doing, we're slowing down a little bit. So, and what I mean by that is when we're worried about COVID, we're worried about all sorts of different things, and slowing down just makes sure that we're intentional about things, that we're not just rushing in to do something because it's how we've always done it. We want to make sure that we're giving a thought process to it, putting thought behind what we're doing, and making sure that we're very intentional about what we're doing to make sure that we're being safe to ourselves, making sure that we're not assuming anything about the comfort level of others in a given space, not assuming that people are comfortable with us in their home when a death occurs. Yes, they've invited us into their home to bring their loved one back into our care, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily comfortable with having other people in their home during a pandemic. So really just being very cautious of that and slowing down to make sure that there's never a mistake or never anything that can transpire that might put somebody's safety at risk or something that might perceive to put their safety at risk.
Is it safe for you to embalm the body of a person who's died from COVID-19?
Sure, yeah. In funeral service, we're trained to deal with all sorts of different pathogens. So really, as long as we're making sure that we are doing everything properly, disinfecting properly, thoroughly washing, through that process, we are cleaning, we're disinfecting. The risk is very nominal as long as we're using our personal protective equipment and as long as we're cleaning. And then once that embalming process is complete, while there's still, I can't say 100% that there's no chance, absolutely, there's never a guarantee in life, but as certain as I can be that once that process is completed, that there's safety there.
Can someone who's died from COVID-19 be buried, or do they have to be cremated?
Sure, good question. So we have multiple options. There is no problem with burial. That can be burial after embalming or without embalming. We can have entombment. There's no changes with that. We can have cremation, the traditional form with flame. We can have water-based cremation called alkaline hydrolysis. There's no concerns with that. The only concerns that we really have is when we're not embalming, we really want to make sure that family has an opportunity to say goodbye and to view the body. We know that importance. And you know this as well as I do, especially with kids, giving them that opportunity to say goodbye. So in the current state of things, that viewing is a little different with when we're not having embalming.
And how are you handling funerals during quarantine?
Yeah, so funerals, we're really encouraging families to do something. So we know the importance of saying goodbye. So we want to address the need to allow ourselves to grieve and to allow ourselves to really truly mourn, to take those physical actions as well as those emotional, find different ways for people to show support. So what we're doing is we're encouraging families to have some sort of service now. Most typically, most of our services, we've had an actual funeral service, either at church or at the funeral home. And we've live streamed that out to anyone that is outside of that number of 10 that we're allowed to have. And 10 really means 8 because there's the minister and we take up a spot, and then there's 8 family members. And that's a little bit of a learning curve from our portion. I'm used to having 3 staff at a funeral. Well, now we're doing all of that to allow for as many family as can be there. So not only doing the funeral director role, but doing the video guy role and doing the audio role and serving multiple hats as that funeral director, as opposed to having multiple staff that's typically there to handle all those things. But if I had the proper amount of staff there, then there's only 6 family members that can be there, and that's not any better. And it's open to interpretation. Some people are interpreting that to be 10 attendees as far as family. Funeral director is an attendee, but the CDC guidelines say 10 people in a gathering.
Sure.
And the other things that we're doing, so some families, we're also having the cemetery. So at the cemetery, we're able to be a little bit more creative in that we're outdoors. So while we can only have 10 people out of their vehicle, we have had it where we've had people along the edge of the cemetery in their cars. They're not right there, but they're participating. And then we've had it where after the burial's complete and family is away from the grave, another set of people can come up to the grave. We've got to do the best we can.
Can you tell me a little bit about the balloon thing that you were doing?
Oh, Hugs from the Heart. So Hugs from the Heart was actually, it's not our idea. So I got to give credit where credit is due. A woman by the name of Andrea Orr, she's a funeral director out on the East Coast. She came up with the idea. So what Hugs from the Heart is it's a program where on our website, people can go and enter a message, click on the Hugs from the Heart, and they'll enter a message, and we'll write that message on a small card. And we'll tie that message to a balloon that is in our chapel. But what the idea of it is a completely empty space feels empty. So how do we fill that physical space without people? And how do we let people know that others are thinking about them? Well, this is one way. We attach the note to the balloon. The balloon fills a physical place in the chapel. And it's kind of interesting that when you look in the chapel and there's people in there and the balloons are about that head level. So it fills that space a lot like how people do. It's not the same, doesn't replace the physical presence, but it does show a way of support, and it visually helps us see that.
That's just such a great way to show someone's support without them being physically there. If you have a small funeral and you're only allowed to have, this many people, 8 people or whatever there, is it okay after quarantine to have another sort of memorial or something like that when everybody's allowed to gather safely?
Yes, that's our hope. So with all the services that we're having now, we don't know how it's going to look. We think it's going to evolve. It's really going to evolve once everything's lifted and once there's some normalcy back. And we don't know how long that's going to be. So while we're encouraging some sort of service now, we know that need to have that physical interaction down the road. So the hope is that there'll be something. So that might be a reception, or it might be a celebration of life. It might be a memorial service. It could be all sorts of different things. Something where we can share that hug. And I could see some services, some families that are close, possibly having something for a couple people at once. if this goes on for a really long time, that might make sense. Each situation is going to be unique. And I'm intrigued to see, and I'm hopeful for what comes out of it.
So resources for funeral directors going forward, because I know a lot of funeral directors are going to be, or hopefully will be watching this to see their friend Brian. We are offering a online pandemic roundtable for funeral directors. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Brian. Thank you everybody for watching. And we hope you stay safe, and we hope things go well at the funeral home for you.
Well, thank you. Yeah.